Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year 0. So, today, we're going to do something a little different. I joined friends of mine, Jason and Mark, on 2-Bit Podcast, and so you get to listen to that interview today. And I think you'll enjoy it. We talk about my journey and how I've turned to orthodoxy, 9/11, and ESG. So, we're going to kind of go a little bit all over the place here, but it's an honest talk and conversation I think you will all enjoy. AutonomyVirtual.com is where you can get all of your needs taken care of. If you are looking for a virtual assistant, go to AutonomyVirtual.com. Ryan Bunting is an expert at doing graphic design and logistics. So he's taken all of these skills that he had in these areas and he's created his own company called Autonomy Virtual. He's a good dude, been a friend of mine from the beginning and always supported me. So go support him at AutonomyVirtual.com. And thank you very much if you do. Fox & Sons Coffee is how I start my day. It is the best BBC I could ever ask for in my mouth. That's Fox & Sons Coffee. The best BBC you could get in your mouth is Fox & Sons Coffee. So go to foxandsons.com and give them a shot. If you are a paid subscriber, be looking out for some little advances because I'm actually in the process of sending out 1-pound bags of Fox & Sons coffee. So, foxandsons.com. Try the best coffee in the world. foxandsons.com. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames and messieurs, we are joined this week with the terrific, the mighty, the fantastic, the bearded Tommy Salmons. Hi, Tommy.
Oh, that was for me. I was like, wow, that's a really nice intro for Mark. I wonder what anybody's going to say for me.
I don't get
Why
that.
Why does everyone think I'm introducing you to? Like, Buck said the exact same thing. Where it was like, wow, geez, they're shining fucking Mark's shoes a little bit, aren't you? Like,
no, I was just impressed. I was like, man, he really likes Mark. No wonder they do a podcast together. I was like, he's going to be like, yeah, this, and then there's this dumb fuck down there.
Yeah, I whip him after the show.
We put them on bottom for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can ship that up. I'm never quite sure.
There you go.
There we go.
Now I'm hosting.
Now you're hosting.
All right. Welcome to year 0.
Now flip me and him. Hang on. Oh,
there you go.
Put him back. There you go.
That's better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like having space on the side of me.
There you go.
How you going, Tommy?
Everything's well, man. Everything's going well and doing just normal stuff. Work, church, ducks, chickens, dogs, wife, same old.
For the people who watch this podcast who don't know who you are, I'm never quite sure what the Overton window or overlap or Venn diagram or whatever of our audience versus who we tend to consume is. But just in case anyone who's tuning into this doesn't know who you are, maybe give us the 411 on Tommy Salmons, the dust cover biography synopsis.
Yeah, I'm just some blue collar jackass that drives a truck and decided I had opinions and started a podcast and made friends with Scott Horton. And he's like, well, you're going to put your podcast on the Libertarian Institute. And I said, okay. So I am the host of Year Zero and just drive a truck most of the time, read as much as I can and with the time I have available. And that's pretty much a synopsis of who I am. It's not that exciting.
Now, you're also one of those weird people who have gotten into Orthodoxy relatively recently. Now, have you been baptized yet? I know we were talking about that a few weeks ago or a month ago or whatever. I don't know time anymore.
Yeah, I was chrismated on Christmas Eve, accepted into the church. Thank you. Yeah, it was quite a hell of a journey, and it hadn't got much easier, but I'm enjoying myself. I'm enjoying life, so I can't complain.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when I first started talking to you and communicating with you when you first came on the first Friend or Fed, you were at that time just like toes in the ortho waters. I think you had just started going to your local church, and just to see that that progression from those early kind of like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here to you're being christened into the church and becoming a member of it is pretty amazing to see. I'm building this theory based on people I've talked to and what other people I've listened to. Adam Curry was just recently on Joe Rogan, and he came out as a full-on Christian, and I don't know the exact dating of it, but it feels like, and you tell me how this sits with you, something happened in 2021, and I'm not just talking COVID, that radically brought people to the church or to some sort of religious founding, or made people start to question, and lifelong atheists like myself and many others were all of a sudden just went whoop, like something's happening. It's almost like a call went out, and people started responding. Do you agree with that? Is that kind of
yeah? Kanye dropped "Jesus is King."
Yeah. Well,
it could be it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're. I mean, I think you're onto something. I think I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for Adam Curry, though. I look at who he is and the way that he approaches things and kind of goes about his business. I haven't listened to a lot of his podcasts, but I've listened to him a few times, and he strikes me as a guy that's curious and he just wants truth. And my wife and I were talking, we had a long conversation about this last night. And it's like, I was already like waist deep in research and trying to figure out what was going on. And then COVID came around. And when COVID came around, I started going down what seemed like at the time like weird rabbit holes. I was like, what does this have to do? Why am I reading about this? Why am I going? What has drawn me into this? And it all led me into the Orthodox stratosphere. And luckily there's a lot of good people online. I know that there are issues, and there always are when you're dealing with people, because that's how people are. But there's a lot of good information out there that you can find online. And if you're seeking, truth, and that's what you're looking for, I have a hard time believing that you don't eventually end up getting there, because that's all it was for me. It was just a matter of going down rabbit holes and reading and researching and studying. And then I found myself staring religion down the barrel of a religion. And I was like, I'm agnostic. I don't know. Like, how am I supposed to know? And, I guess it was about about a year and a half of studying and reading and researching and thinking. And just finally I was like, all right, my priest, he made a joke whenever I got chrismated. He's like, it only took us 6 months to get you to commit to coming to inquiry classes and becoming a catechumen. And it was because I was like, yeah, I mean, I like you guys and I don't have an issue with it, and I'm going to keep coming to the church. But I kind of like to do it on my terms and the way I want to do it. And it doesn't always work that way, and things happen. And there are moments that I feel like, oh, wow, I moved way too fast. And there are moments where I'm like, God, what took me so long to get here? So,
yeah, we kind of talk about this with Buck. It's amazing to me. Like, you drag your heels so long to get the initial step, and I think it's different for all of us. Even though I'm sure there's overlap. My experience, what I've talked on the show enough, I'm not going to redo it again, but it was relatively dramatic. But that's the only way it would have worked for me. Like, I had to be shaken and brought to it in order for it to work. If it hadn't worked, if it hadn't happened that way, I would still be like, oh, I don't know, like, yeah, sure, I like Sarah from Rose, I like the books, but and I think so. Yeah, so I think it's different for everyone a little bit, but at the same time, there seems to have been something, and I'm choosing 21 because it seems to be that seems to be a weird inflection point with everyone that I talk to, that you and I are connected with, and even people who we aren't. And then you start hearing these stories, you're like, 21, right? Like, it happened. Something happened in 2021.
Well, I think it happened before that, and people came to the realization in 21. I
Sure.
mean, I was looking for a long time, so it wasn't like I just started looking in 21 and that it was there. It was a process, and it was a long process, and it was years of reading and research, and it just led me there. And I still, at times, I'm like, it's just dumbfounding how I got to that point. But I'm glad I did. It's not that I regret it. It's just, it was, it's different for everybody, and all the experiences are different for everybody. But at the same time, whenever you talk to somebody who's been through it, you automatically have that kinship and that kind of easiness in talking about things.
Yeah, the similarities are profound. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's he who seeks shall find, right? And I think there's sort of a confluence of things, and I don't want to overstate our importance, which is quite minuscule, but I think maybe there's something to do with the interaction of a lot of people, and once you sort of reach critical mass, people coming out and saying, "Hey, look, this is where I'm at." It gets easier for other people to maybe come to terms with it, come speak about it, and maybe that's a little thing that we've added to the conversation.
Yeah, I've been reading the biography of Saint Silouan the Athonite by Sophrony, and it's just, even though he went into ascetics and he was a monk, reading the battles that he engaged in on a spiritual level, like through his mind, and having to deal with the doubts and thoughts and fears and all that stuff that he had to deal with whenever he first got to the monastery. It's very comforting, because you're like, okay, like it's not just me that are dealing with all this internal like strife that's happening constantly, and it amped up, it cranked up. It was like it was, I guess it was 2021 around. It was December 2021 whenever I called, and I spent 3 hours on the phone with Father Turbo Qualls, and we talked, and I told him about the stuff I was dealing with. And then after that, it was like shortly after that, I backed away. I was like, nah, I'm not going to do this, man. This seems like a whole lot of work. I don't know if I want to do this. I don't want any part of this. And there's this voice in the back of my head, like, you need to go back to the church. You need to go back to the church. You need to go back to the church. And finally, I guess it was in June of 2022 that I decided to go back. And, that having overcome all the objections that just kept running, because it was like the whole warfare, everything that was happening in my head the day I talked to Father Turbo in December had stopped by June. But the one thing that didn't stop was that voice in my head telling me I had to go back to this church, you know. And so there was that pull. And as all the other tensions faded, it was the only thing left. And so therefore I had to do it, and I did it. And now I am where I am. And all those battles that I was battling that struck me, pushed me in the direction of getting on that call with Father Turbo in December are continuing now, but they had subsided until I went back to the church. And it's like, well, that's not a coincidence.
Well, yeah, there are no coincidences. That's the thing that when you start to accept a lot of these things non-critically, I was an atheist for a very long time. And so all my readings and all my thinkings of the church and religion at that time was critical. You tear it apart and see, look at this dumb shit. But when you reverse that and look at everything non-critically, then, and you start to experience those experiences, the experience in your life that is unquantifiable and undeniable at the same time, you're left with the rational human mind is left with very little other avenues. You're like, well, okay, I know this is true because it happened, right? I know these things are absolutely true because it happened to me, and I can't quantify it in any other way, except by looking at everyone else who explains these experiences, who is much more learned and much more intelligent and much more everything than I am, and they're saying it's this thing, so it's got to be that thing, because otherwise, what else do I do with this? Like, either I'm gone completely insane, which is a complete impossibility, or it's what everyone's been saying this is for like thousands of years. I'm going to go on the side of the 1,000-year kind of proofs, because otherwise I have to deal with me being completely nuts, and telling my wife that she already kind of thinks like I'm. My wife met me when I was an atheist, and when I had this, shock treatment, I didn't tell her for months. Although she knew something was different. And when I finally just came out, I'm like, yeah, I'm essentially an Orthodox Christian now, or I'm, in that path. She just, to this day, I think she's still kind of like waiting for me to go, oh, okay, that was a phase. Like, that old Orthodox thing, whatever, man. I'm over it.
Mythic crisis.
Yeah, well, I think it's inarguable that there is some type of revival going on, and I think COVID definitely did play a part in it. Whether it was just maybe waking up a latent Christianity in a lot of people, or addressing it in a way that I think, I don't know, something happened where it made the vision clearer and easier to see. Like, oh, okay, you got to serve somebody. May as well be
a lot of it is, at least with me, and again, I can't speak for other people's experiences, only my own. With me, it was, and I was talking to my wife about this last night, whenever I'm seeing things that are occurring in the country or around the world, and I'm like, this is like something from like 3,000 years ago. This is like child sacrifice, or this is et cetera, et cetera. Like, this is just a repeated pattern. This is something I remember reading about from a distant age. This doesn't belong in modern society. Like, where does this come from? And it was just coming to the realization that there was a spirit behind the idea, and whatever idea it would be, there would be some sort of life force behind it. And understanding that I didn't want to be on the side of that life force. So I would hear, like, let's say a Father Turbo speak over here, and I'd be like, I like what he's saying. I want to be on his side. So I slowly began to drift in that direction, and just to surround myself with those types of people. And I had this conversation with Reed Coverdale. I was like, you got to admit, even as an atheist, because he's an atheist, I said, you have to admit, even as an atheist, me as an agnostic, I'd much rather be surrounded by the Christians and the Christian society than by all these crazy hedonists. And he was like, yeah, because
Right.
you can trust those people. Like there's something about that makes it. And so as I came to that conclusion, that realization, I began to shift who I surrounded myself with. And then as I began to shift who I surrounded myself with, I realized I didn't know near as much, number one, as I thought I did. And I wasn't near as happy as I thought I was. And whenever I began to face those realizations, and like just some like simple things, like whenever I found out what like the etymology of the word believe was, because one of the reasons I left Christianity in the first place was they're like, well, you believe. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Do I just say it? And I started listening, thanks to Matthew Erickson, I started listening to Lord of Spirits. He turned me on to that and introduced me to that. And they get into like the etymology of these words and where these ideas come from and all this. And so they're like, no, the etymology of the word believe means to care, to love. It's an action, right? And it's like, oh, well, shit. All right. Or the etymology of the word love, as in husbands love your wives, is it translates to charity. So it's like, oh, okay. So you're telling me that I have to take this action. I have to put my mind in line and look at an end goal and take action in order for it to all start to make sense, for it to come into focus. Well, I've never been told that. Nobody told me that. Like that, I was raised Southern Baptist. I wasn't told that. I was told, like, you just believe. So you just say it. It's a profession of faith. Okay, I profess it. Now what? Like nothing feels different. I'm not getting any kind of like clues as to what's going on here. And so it all was like make believe in your head as far as I was concerned. It was just something it was like a mental exercise that I went through, every Sunday. And that was it. That was it. That's the only place it had in my life and whatever. And so as I started digging into the Orthodox faith, and I started discovering the traditions and the way that these verses and these ideas were taught by the father, the fathers of the church, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. It at least makes sense. Now I have something I can wrap my hands around. Something I can chew on and kind of like contemplate. And, just the idea of faith, not meaning faith, but meaning faithfulness. And it's better translated as faithfulness. Well, if you're married or you've been in a relationship, you know what faithfulness is. You know how that looks, but you don't know how faith looks. Right. And the Baptists always had this like weird thing, like, oh, well, when you walk in a room and you sit on a chair, you have faith that chair will hold you up. I'm like, well, that's the chair's fucking job, man. It better hold me up, and I'm like, that's kind of weird. That didn't seem right. So by identifying how Christianity was actually an activity, and it encompassed all the senses of your body through the Orthodox faith, then it made a lot more sense to me than it ever did when I was younger.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely sort of gone on our own journey realizing some of those things. And I think the big one, at least for me especially, was that the belief thing, and that believing it's the act of believing. Because I'd always, I never liked when people try to convince me of a religion. It's like, well, that's, you're not going to win that debate. Hitchens will, he'll floor you every time. But if you tell me, oh no, it's something you got to believe in, well, I can believe it. You know what I mean? It's right. that word, like, no, I believe in it because it's beyond explanation in some way. It requires faith and belief, and I can be cool with that.
Right. The Lord of Spirits, the last one they did was on marriage, on the sacrament of marriage, which was really interesting. And one of the things that struck me that Father Stephen DeYoung said was, like, you take the actions so that your mind gets there, right? And I was like, wow, that's interesting. Like, you're taking that would be faith, right? That would be the act of faith. You're taking the actions in the belief or the understanding that eventually it's all going to make sense up here. But taking the actions gets the motion started, gets the process started. And so, like, whenever they were commanded, husbands, love your wives. And if love, the etymology of the word love translates actually to like charity, it's actually giving you a direct command as to what to do for your wife and how to treat your wife and be charitable towards your wife. And so there's this caring notion, this providing aspect. There are all these different things that go involved with charity and being charitable. And he was like, yeah, because when you wait, not every day you wake up are you feeling like your honeymoon, you know? It's like I told, I was with Kyle Matovic the other day. And I told him, I said, man, I heard that Andrew Tate said this thing. And if there's only one thing that I've ever heard him say, it's the truest thing I've ever heard said. And it's like, it doesn't matter how I feel when I wake up in the morning. I got to do the same thing. I don't have a choice. This is what I have to do. This is what my day entails. This is what the goals I have to meet. This is what I have to accomplish. That's it. I don't have it. It doesn't matter how I feel. And if I'm sitting there, and so love as a feeling doesn't make sense whenever you put it in like a framing like that. Like, no, it's something I have to do. Right? I have to make a conscious effort. I have to act upon it. I have to think about it. It's not something that's just, ooh, unicorns and rainbows flying out of my ass.
And it's like, I think it's similar anyways to how if you smile, will make you happy. It's like that. It's like, no, it's not a way you're supposed to feel. It's a thing you're supposed to do. And then maybe that action will procure that emotion.
Yeah.
The action is paramount.
The way I described it the last time I talked about this was I was on with Adam Patrick. I had Adam Patrick on my podcast, and I was like, yeah, fake it till you make it.
Right.
Like, I mean, that's basically what it is. I don't like saying it that way because that sounds like wrong to me, but it's like the best, like, modern way of saying it that I could think of saying it.
No, it's interesting what you said before too about seeing what's going on culturally in the wider world and how it's regressing to almost ancient tribal, prehistoric notions of things. And I think that sort of brought a lot of people back in a reference to
drag queens are dressing like Moloch, man.
Right. Yeah. They're not hiding it. But I think there's also, Jason always says this, people are very egotistical in our view of now, and that we're so much smarter and more evolved than the people of old. And I think once we're realizing that this regression, then maybe it got us over our ego about the other side of it, which was the tradition and religion. We're saying, oh, we're seeing why that fence was built. We're understanding why those traditions, the way the older people thought. I mean, read the Bible, read these old writings, and then go talk to the average American, and you're going to be hard pressed to say that we've evolved.
Yeah.
Well, what's driving me nuts, and I accidentally got drawn into a family conversation about this recently, and I kicked myself afterwards. I'm like, just shut up, stop, right? But I couldn't let it go because there were first. I think I brought it up because religion got brought up, and the constant thing about it being just a story. These are just stories, and I'm like, well, okay, well, let's consider that for a second. Jesus Christ is just a story. Christianity is just a story. It's a story that ended child sacrifice and human sacrifice in every single culture that accepted it. Every culture that adopted Christianity ended human sacrifice within its culture within a generation. Riddle me that, like. That's a pretty powerful thing. So if you're telling me that's just a story, hey man, just a bunch of words on a page. It's like it stopped people from being mass murdered constantly in every single culture that adopted Christianity. So even if it's just a story, That's a fucking powerful story. Can we at least agree with that
That's
one?
the same. It's like, well, if it works, who are you to knock it, right? So here's a
Right.
story about someone who came along and was the sacrifice, and then in real life it ends people sacrificing people. Okay, that works. You got a better one?
What's frustrating, and I mean, I don't know, maybe
the
tell me we'll play.
story is the problem.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? Because in the in that Adam Patrick Joe Rogan clip, it's amazing to me because, and I always have to remind myself, like I used to be that, like I used to say all those words with
Adam Curry,
with emphasis, on the Joe Rogan side of it. Like I was very much baked in the Chris Hitchens school of atheism, where I was an anti-theist and I was hard to the paint. So, and then I started softening, and that's kind of where Joe's position is, where it's just like, hey man, they're all stories, and how can you can't prove this thing? I'd have to see some serious evidence of that Christ is the Son of God, and you're like, well, okay, well, what evidence would that be though? Like, this is always the give me evidence. You're like, well, what evidence would you need? Like, before you actually even say those words, you'd have to be able to define in your brain what that evidence would be. Like, do I have to show you an angel, a man with wings attached to his back? Like, what exactly do you need in order to believe? And it's like you have to take that step into belief, like going back to what we were saying, in order to have that experience. And once you have the experience, and it's like that's all there is. Like, now it's been proven to you on one shape or another. You can do it. I think, the Jay Dyer method, which is like learn every single thing about the history of the church and get deep into that, or be more mystical and only have the living proof of God in your soul. Either way, and I'm sure there's a connection between those two things. Either way, it's not just you believe in something. It's not just that it's true. It's real. It's absolute reality that's unshakable. And for people like us who are constantly trying to find out what the truth is, what's the truth behind the thing, once you encounter it, it's like, oh, well, that answers everything and nothing at the same time. Because what's Lord of Spirits always says this, and it's a constant running theme through most orthodoxy. It's like you get to some point, you go, yes, and but, I don't know, God. Like, oh, that happened to you, yeah, God, and you just kind of move on their day.
That's the interesting catch-22. It's like if what it would require for you is God literally coming down and telling you himself, then that wouldn't require belief, would it? So which way do you want it?
Yeah, well, I mean, he kind of already did that, right?
That's right.
There were eyewitnesses that took notes. So it's like, I don't know what else you want. You believe in Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great and Napoleon Bonaparte, but you never saw these people do anything either. Like, what else do you want?
Okay, this is actually, I think this is a good launching off point, because you've done some amazing work on 9/11 and ESGs. Now, I'm more familiar with ESG than the 9/11 stuff, but to talk about people's belief systems, that goes right to the heart of it, because what people struggle with in both those conspiracy theories is that you're presented with an official narrative. You can see with your own eyes certain things, and your own rational brain starts looking at these things going, wait a minute. And then you have all the rest of it, right? All the other commentary and everything else like that is that it was happening at the moment it was happening, a few years afterwards, and now we're at, like with 9/11, we're over 20 years out from that point. And it does challenges people's belief systems in what common morality is. Certainly COVID, I think, that did that for a lot of people. It certainly did that with me, where I became aware that most of my liberal mindset was the foundation of that was a common moral system that, by and large, 90% of the population, standing population, all agreed with. And then you wake up one day and you realize, no, that's a complete and total lie. And there are things happening by people who are, for the lack of a better word, infested, has been invaded with some sort of demonic sort of energy that's directing this stuff. And when you start looking into ESG and you're looking at all these other control mechanisms, like that's the that's the truth, that we're not dealing with common morality here. There's a definite good and evil spiritual war going on, and we can focus on certain elements of it, but it's all interconnected with that, where they get to prey on people is that the majority of people want to believe that everyone's good and your government cares about you, and they wouldn't do this. They wouldn't. How could, I remember with the 9/11, I remember sitting around a table of Americans talking about it, and they're like, how dare you suggest that the American government would do anything like that? I'm like, I'm just saying it's fishy. I'm just saying that they figured out who the terrorists were, and Building 7, in like, there's a lot of little things that don't make sense, and no one's explaining it. And in fact, when you ask about it, all you get is anger, and that's usually my first indication, like, okay, someone's covering something up. So I don't know. That's a whole bunch of for me. But where do you want to start with that? Like, what got you interested in 9/11? What got you interested in ESGs? And maybe, especially with the ESG stuff, you can kind of do the explain it to people like they're 5, what that is and how it's being used.
Yeah, I mean, 9/11. It's not my strong point. By any stretch of imagination. Reed Coverdale introduced me to Adam Fitzgerald. We started talking, had a podcast scheduled to record with Adam and some other guy. I can't remember his name. I can see his face, but I can't remember his name. I apologize. Sorry. And we were supposed to do a podcast to all 3 of us. Other guy backed out. And so Adam and I recorded. And I really didn't know anything about 9/11. It was just like, I knew like the official narrative. I knew that the 28 pages existed. I knew that there were a lot of like weird things that happened. And I was like, I don't understand all this that's occurring around there. But I had never looked into it in any detail. So I just asked Adam to come on and just start talking about it. I happen to know enough about the way that the CIA operates because I was interested in the Kennedy assassination and stuff like that when I was younger. So I happen to have kind of a clear view of how the CIA operates. I've read some biographies on some former CIA agents. So I was able to take what I knew about foreign policy and the CIA and have a decent conversation with Adam, but I really try to let him kind of run the show when we have those conversations because he's got all the information. He knows all that stuff and much more than I could ever know about it.
Yeah, and for anyone who wants to do the deep dive, we definitely recommend checking out your, what is it, like 10-part series?
Right now we're at 9. We've done 9. I'm sure we're going to do more. We haven't. It's been, I guess it's been about a month since he and I talked about what we're going to do next. Though I was texting with him yesterday, it didn't come up. So I'll have to organize with him, go through what we've already covered, figure out what's left to cover, and covering that. And he has a podcast of his own called The Darkened Hour, which is really good.
Okay.
Yeah, he interviews former intelligence, former military, he gets deep into that stuff.
Wow.
He's been doing this research for like 16 years. I mean, he knows his shit when it comes to 9/11.
Yeah, you can tell when you listen to it. It's like, it basically seems endless.
Right.
And
And the way he says it, it's just kind of like, this is it. And you're like, wait, hold on. Wait. What did you just say?
Yeah.
So
it's a great topic because it combines so many things. I mean, not only were there so many different groups involved to some level or not, but you can start there and branch off and get into whatever it is. If it's the security state, international diplomacy. I mean, there's it's not one that I think that's why people are sort of endlessly fascinated with it, because it kind of touches on all the rabbit holes. You can get into any of them from that avenue, and everybody seems to kind of have their little bit. Everyone's got a little bit of dirt on them,
right.
when you go there. So do you have, with the extensive amount that you've gone through it, do you have a synopsis for the people who are like, like, oh, it smells fishy, but maybe not interested enough to do 20 hours on it, you know?
My opinion on the whole situation, just talking with Adam and what little research I have done, what I think happened, and I don't think it's beyond the capacity, is that the NSA and the CIA knew that there was a plot, and they knew generally what the plot was. I don't know if they had a date, but I know they at least knew what the plot was and that there was a plot out there. And did they intentionally turn their heads and let it happen? Did they just not realize that it was happening that day? Were they involved? I don't know, man. I don't have a real clear opinion on that. And because there are so many just weird things that occurred. And just for instance, and I'll just throw this out there, Thomas Drake, who was an NSA whistleblower, came out and said that if you would have taken the entirety of the knowledge of the NSA about the plot on 9/11, you could have stopped the attacks. Like that. I mean, he would know better than me, right? So he knows what the NSA was involved in, how they were tapping phones, which phones they were tapping, where they were operating overseas, how Al-Qaeda was operating around U.S. intelligence or attempting to operate around U.S. intelligence, how U.S. intelligence accidentally intercepted calls that regarding 9/11 whenever like there was, and it was just 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon type situation where they happened to end up tapping a phone of a guy that Osama bin Laden called every week, and they were talking about plotting. It's like things like that, like just weird occurrences happening. And so there's a lot of weird stuff out there. And I can see why people believe that the US government was involved in some way, shape, or form. I don't have the evidence to say, yeah, for sure they were involved, but I can say they for sure knew about the plot and didn't do enough to stop the plot. Right. Now, as far as 9/11 occurring, like the attacks occurring on the same day, they were doing FAA
what do you call that?
Test. Over
like every false flag.
Like it's really? That's weird. And
coincidences, just a lot of coincidences,
right? And so
but you're not supposed to notice, just like Israel, just like
but does that mean like the highest levels of the government were involved, or does it mean like one person that was able to schedule this on this day was involved? You know what I'm saying? Like, so because if you understand the way that the CIA operates, and I would assume the NSA works very similarly, it's very compartmentalized, and it's compartmentalized for a simple reason. They want deniability. They want plausible deniability whenever things go south. So whenever you look at, like, let's say MK Ultra, for example, right? Like Sidney Gottlieb was a really big figure in MK Ultra. Sidney Gottlieb was running tests, all kinds of tests on medications and LSD and all these different things. And he was trying to create bioweapons, doing all this thing under the scope of MK Ultra. Sidney Gottlieb had no idea about Cameron Hewen or Hewen Cameron, I'm sorry, in Canada. No idea about that psychiatrist running these experiments in Canada. Also under MK Ultra. He also had no idea about the prostitutes that they had sleeping with dudes, drugging them with LSD so they could see if they could like get information out of them. No idea about that. They compartmentalize this stuff to such a degree, it's hard to like sit there and say, well, just because one guy knew and he was involved and he was doing this, and that nobody else was involved. And it is very possible in the way especially at that time, that the bureaucratic state, especially intelligence, was set up that it was one guy that had infiltrated the intelligence agencies, worked his way to the highest levels, and set up these things to make it harder to detect what was happening on the day of. It's very possible.
Yeah, and that flows through with a lot of conspiracies. I mean, I go deep on NASA, stuff like that, moon landing, and like, oh, wouldn't they all know? It's like, if you understand how compartmentalized these organizations are, and it's done as a protection, but then it kind of, I think it creates a lot of conspiracies because nobody understands the whole picture. And I think with 9/11, that's what upsets a lot of people, because you're kind of stuck with one of two inevitable outcomes. It's either the government is dangerously inept or dangerously evil.
Right.
And
Well,
people don't like
they can be
either one of
both.
those.
They can be both. That's the crazy thing about it, right? It's like
they look at them as a monolith too.
Yeah, which is
It's not monolithic. There are different interests competing with each other all the time within government.
Mm-hmm. Well, like, I think I heard that on your show, but it's a great insight, because for a long time the narrative was they did 9/11 so they could go to war in Iraq. It's like, well, then why did they use Saudis? Since when do they need a reason to go to war?
Right.
Right? Yeah. It doesn't even add up there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff, to ties back into the Orthodox stuff is, or religion in general, is like when you remove God from the hierarchy and you put man in there, all these other weird things start cropping up because we are religious people. Like we tend to lose sight when we talk about the deep state. We talk about these entities, these egregores that we create, and they're faceless, they're manless, they're entities that exist out there, and we place all we're basically just scapegoating. We're using that scapegoat mechanism ourselves on the other side. Now they might be deserved in a lot of ways, but we forget that those institutions, those CIA operatives, all those guys are human beings, and they're having the same suffering of that same spiritual suffering that everyone else is. They're just in a position to do something about it that we don't have access to. Right. So imagine if you're having that spiritual suffering and you don't know what to do with it, and your modernist brain can't compute it, and you're not seeking help in the church, and you're not laying down arms, you're not becoming meek, you're in fact doing quite the opposite. Then you get the WEF. And it makes complete and total sense.
Great segue. Yeah.
It makes
weird organization. You come up with some way to get communism into capitalism through the back door and govern everybody to save the planet. Right. I mean,
there's a few great lines. I've been re-listening to Bob Dylan quite a bit, and like from the song "Visions of Johanna," he's like, this is what salvation must look like after a while. When you get past a certain point, and you're actually trying to be more Christian than Christ, and you feel like that's your duty is to save people, to save humanity, to save the world, to save it all. And if you divorce yourself from morality to that point, then you go, well, in order to save people, we're going to have to,
enslave them a little bit.
Did
you hear John Kerry at Davos last week? Right, he came out and literally said, like, "Oh, we're the special ones, put here through some act of God, and it's our job to save the world."
Right.
Like, and that's like
by any means necessary.
Word for word, basically. But yeah, so Tommy, what's your take on ESG? Did it come from the WEF, or is it more organic than that?
Oh, ESG. Okay. ESG is, well, for those that don't know, it stands for Environmental, Social, and Justice and Corporate Governance. All right. What it is, it's more of a corporatist system than it is from the left, but they're utilizing leftist politics because the leftists have kind of like almost like a monopoly on the culture and on kind of like mimetic kind of ideas within the culture and the way that things move. So they understand by taking these policy agendas from the left, pumping them into corporations and partnering with governments and creating this public-private partnership, that you could move culture in any direction you wanted. You can move the people however you wanted. So it's a form of control. And the easiest way to understand it is they've weaponized the financial institutions. So what they've done is they've come up with a system into which you're working on a social credit score based upon their metrics on whether or not you're environmentally sound, whether you're socially sound, or whether you're corporately sound. And based upon these metrics, they will give you a score. That score will determine your access to loans, funds, investments, whether or not you can even touch your bank account, payment processors, all these things. So when you see people like Kanye or the Canadian truckers or Alex Jones or Donald Trump getting shut out of bank accounts, getting shut out of payment processors, this is all a result of ESG. You know, they broke social laws, basically, where you get like hate speech laws come out of like this idea. So it's a form of control utilizing the financial system to lure the corporations into a trap that then moves the population into that same trap. And it puts you in kind of a technocratic prison of sorts.
Yeah, okay, that's a good synopsis. I mean, so I've heard criticisms, and I don't know where, because it's really incredible how daftly they sort of snuck it in and got everybody to go along. I don't know whether they were. I still don't get what the payoff is for corporate America, and I also don't understand how they're not running into the fiduciary duty wall, where this is an abdication of what's right in their corporate structure.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a really good question. All right. So in order to understand that, you have to understand where ESG began and how it began.
Yeah, that's what I don't know.
This came up in about 2004. The UN hired financial institutions to write up a white paper on sustainable development, right? From 2004, you ended up in 2009. 2009, you had the Copenhagen, Denmark COP15 conference, right? There, the governments around the world had signed a treaty to pump $100 billion into undeveloped nations. In 2015, you end up with the Paris Climate Accord. The Paris Climate Accord, these nations that had agreed to pump $100 billion into undeveloped nations, then brought in financial institutions and corporations, joined them into the conference, had them sign on to the treaty. They signed on to the treaty, and the way that they operate is, well, let me see. Am I answering your question? Am I doing all right?
Yeah, actually, because I've been pondering this for a long time, and I didn't like, where is the origin? And that's the best I've ever heard. So
okay, yeah, okay. So when they signed the treaty in March of 2020, the SEC started a task force. The task force was an ESG task force to monitor financial institutions where their investments were going, right? So what they did is they began to implement on a broader scale. See, originally ESG had been flying under the radar because it was on a very narrow scale. It was on a very narrow playing field, and it only had to do with large financial institutions like BlackRock. But then you had companies like Citigroup begin to add ESG scores to the dashboards of people's 401ks. And people started noticing and asking, what the hell is this? Well, Klaus Schwab in 2019 happened to write an article called The Great Reset that was published in Time Magazine, and he mentioned ESG in there. So people start piecing this all together. This is what got me into it, was piecing all this crap together. And they started seeing like, oh, okay, so what you're doing is you've created a governmental task force in which financial institutions can be penalized based upon their ESG metrics. That gives the financial institutions the incentive to penalize corporations or individuals based upon their ESG metrics. So instead of the financial institution doing business with the gun dealer down the street, he would then cut off business, deny all loans. You can't buy a home. You can't get a mortgage. You can't do anything. You can't even access your bank account, because if I'm in business with you, then it looks bad on me. The government's going to lay down fines upon me, right? So this is how it trickled down to the individual, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so they have gotten to a point to where they're trying to curb individual action through the utilization of the financial institutions and the financial markets as a weapon against you.
Right.
Which is why I pulled all my money out of like big banks. I went to a small credit union, right? And it's like I'm doing everything I can to make sure that they're not reaching me to the best of my ability, because the more, and this is why you saw like Florida divest $2 billion from BlackRock. Now, $2 billion isn't a chink in the armor of BlackRock, right? BlackRock controls over $20 trillion across the world. $2 billion is a very small amount of money to them. But what Florida did is they set a precedent. Whereas you have 19 states in the United States, you have 19 attorney generals suing BlackRock for the ESG practices.
Nice.
You have 11 states that have passed laws stating that financial institutions cannot discriminate against people based upon their purchases and their political ideologies, right? So these are ways that people are fighting back against ESG and just that totalitarian metric that it lays down upon you.
That's interesting. So, like all things evil, does it come from the UN? I mean, unlike this is the thing. What I liked about the Great Reset is there was some doofus who wrote a book about it, and you could just point and say, "Yeah, it's that guy."
Well, that
Whereas
same
ESG is a lot
doofus
more
wrote
murky.
about ESG. Like
So-
that same doofus. All right, so that doofus actually came up with the idea of stakeholder capitalism back in 1973.
Yeah.
All of these ideas, the Great Reset, ESG, all that base is kind of rooted off of stakeholder capitalism.
Okay.
But that was his attempt to incorporate like the globalist kind of Cecil Rhodes kind of doctrine into the world financial markets.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a doofus with a bust of Stalin behind him, right?
Yeah.
At his desk,
Yeah.
right? So,
In billions of dollars that
Yeah.
at his disposal, which makes him a very dangerous doofus.
yeah, it's interesting because I've tried to sort of, I'm always trying to fourth turning these things, and I see
Yeah.
it kind of as a repeat of the 19th century or 20th century. I don't know how that
Have
works.
you read his book, Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution?
No.
I have.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No.
you got to read it. You got to read it. I got a lot of my information from that book.
What's always stunning with me is that how they lay it out, and this is what returns me to the idea that we are dealing with still with moral human beings. They're just they've inverted it.
It's
right?
skewed.
It's the inversion of the cross. This is why we're entering. That's why the explanation that we're in a spiritual war really hits home, because it is antichrist. You're taking Christian morals that, if you just looked at it on the face of it.
Nice.
I have the PDF. Yeah, I've read and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and then Great Reset, and then he did one.
Yeah,
I
the
think
Great
afterwards,
Narrative. I got those other two
Yeah,
in this bookshelf next to me here, and I can't get to it because it faces the other way.
Yeah.
A lot of it's really poorly written, and it's fairly boring. But he does, like, when he does hit little things, you're like, oh, okay, here's the planning, right?
Right.
And if you accept that at first, uncritically,
Such a pain in the ass to read, though.
they're brutal.
It is
Thankfully, they're
brutal.
short.
It's like reading a business white paper. It's just like, all right, dude. It's just, and you got to
it
like
basically is,
constantly
right?
slap yourself in the face just to be waking up to see something. You have to read paragraphs 4 times to understand what kind of drudgery he's talking about. You're like, what is going on here? Yeah, it takes some dedication to like dig into that stuff. And I do that all for my audience because I love them that much.
It's good. Yes, it's second only to like the pains someone like James Lindsay goes through reading those papers.
Yes,
of postmodern.
I would rather somebody stick freaking splinters up under my fingers.
It's like translating from Klingon.
Well, also when you just read this and you're going and you understand, when you start to see the early flaw, right? It's like going back and trying to read like Rousseau and a lot of these other 19th century or 18th century philosophers who, Kant, for example, where you go, okay, I see where you've gone wrong because I'm living 150 to 200 years past the point, and I've seen where your philosophies end up. So I know you're wrong. And you go back to it and you're trying to understand, putting yourself in the mindset of that person going, okay, why did you think this was right? Like, why did you think this solved these issues? Because you honestly did. I think Klaus Schwab, if I'm going to take him as a on face value as a human being and evil intentions aside, he doesn't see it that way. Mm-hmm. He doesn't see himself as a villain. He doesn't see, I don't think Justin Trudeau or any of these other guys think themselves as villains. Maybe they had that guilty conscience at night, which would explain some other actions, but they honestly, I think, believe that this is the right thing to do to solve these problems that they've been convinced are problems. And when you accept those early lies, then everything else follows.
Here's the thing. When you read these guys, you all know Harari, you read Klaus Schwab, you read any of these guys. They have one thing in common, one big, massive thing in common. They describe citizens as little more than house-trained pets. That's the way they talk about us. So when they're talking about this is what we do for humanity, they believe like it would be like the equivalent of somebody opening a national wildlife park to preserve a species. That's the way they view us. They don't view us as the same species that they are.
Right.
And so we have to, when you engage in reading this stuff, you have to understand that they say things that are insulting about the herd animals that are humans.
Yeah.
Well, because they view themselves on another plane, which is why I'll break this here. I actually told Courtney Turner, I was on her podcast the other day, told her this, but her podcast doesn't get released for 2 weeks. So this is actually going to break the news here. On February 4th, I'm recording an episode with Jay Dyer on Gnosticism as the roots of the secular religion and scientism, and how Gnosticism has led to this globalist ideal that we see going on around us.
Yeah, interesting. I was going to say similar to that. Like, I think it's pretty clear that what they're concerned with, is preserving their habitat that we happen to coexist in.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's not for humanity. This is why they worship the planet, right? And like Jason was saying, it is an inversion of the Christian ethic, whereas Christ's message was life is suffering, pick up your cross and bear it. And what they're trying to do is rid the world of, apparently rid the world of suffering. But
they're trying to rid their species of suffering,
right,
on our backs.
And so we're
the cattle, we're the workhorses that have to do all this stuff for them.
Yeah. Well, and increasingly now we're seeing with AI and things like that. I think what's interesting to me is watching the academic group reacting to AI the way they are, because they're slowly dawning on the realization that this is going to replace them too. They didn't care when it was like, well, driverless cars are going to take out truck drivers, and automation is changed factories, and street sweepers, all those menial jobs that are going to get replaced by robotics or AI. They thought this was a boon for humanity, and who would want to do those jobs? But when they wake up to the reality, that's like, oh no, it's taking white collar jobs too.
Right.
And
as soon
by
as
the way,
it's doctors and lawyers and
soon we won't need
professors,
because we don't need you, do we?
Yeah, suddenly they're not all jazzed about UBI. It's crazy.
Well, it was funny that a friend of mine asked me a while back, and they were like, so if you think the vaccines are detrimental to human existence and will actually cause deaths, because the elites want to cull the herd. Why do you think the elites would cull the herd of those that follow directions and do what they're told? And I was like, because it's the ones that won't listen to them that are productive. They need us to produce for them. They need us to do all the work. They need us to unstop their toilets and do their run wires through their freaking attics and insulate their homes and produce food and make sure their technology is still running.
It's and they always will.
Yeah, you need the productive class. We're the productive class.
You have to have the productive class. So you get rid of the lower classes of people, those that aren't willing to do the work, that are a secondary parasitic class created by the elites in order to give the government more power. You get rid of them and you keep the productive class, who are basically going to end up being your slaves under the point of a gun.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, exactly. And, what I see it, and to bring Gerard a little bit into it, is that, when you have rivalry, rivalry tends to happen when people become more aware of how close they are. We all think we have differentiation. We all think we're unique and we're different. In reality, we're 99% the same, and then have a few little differences. I mean, this is how memetics work. So the big thing that's happened over the last, let's say, 40, 50 years, maybe a bit longer, is that the elite class and the knuckle draggers are almost on parity now, because we have technology and access to technology. Like, look, the three of us in this room, right, are not supposed to, we're based on our class, and I'm not talking about financially, just on our class level. We didn't go to Ivy League schools. We didn't come from rich parents. We didn't have this. We didn't have that. We work. Tommy and I both work blue collar jobs. Like, we're not supposed to have these conversations. We're not supposed to be smart enough to notice this shit. Right? Like, that was always the divide. And now it's from this, it's gone to this. Not to mention, there's a whole bunch of people who have all these college degrees who are like, hey, why am I not making $400,000 a year? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, because you're not designed to, stupid. Like, you're supposed to pay into this thing and then go take whatever we give you and just continue doing that. Mm-hmm. And if you're unsatisfied with that, cool, we'll just get rid of you. We're going to liquidate that whole class of people, one way or the other. And yeah, you're right. Like, be left with all the lower classes, all the serfs, who they will now control your life. Like, once, and I don't want to get too blackpilling about this, because we'll try to find a more uplifting note to this. But once they control, I'm very convinced that the next thing going forward is going to be the cyber pandemic.
Well, I was just going to say that they control everything except the internet, right?
Once they control the internet and they control the protocols, and they say you can only get access to the internet if you have this digital passport that's your vaccine status and da 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 da. That's the only way you're going to access the internet.
And all that is going to be controlled by ESG.
Exactly. And once they can do that, then your inputs are going to be completely different, because now they'll control your inputs. So how would you know what's true? They could just say, hey, there's this new virus that's killing people in the streets. Here's an AI generated news report, right? And that's all you'll know, because there won't be us be able to tell you about this, because if we do, we'll either be arrested or segregated to some channel that no one goes to. Even if they allow us to talk, it'll be to no one, essentially.
Right. Yeah. So what are your thoughts then on Elon? Because with what he wants to do, X.com, turning Twitter into the WeChat of the West, that would be the ideal avenue to onboard everyone into the technological gulag. But he's out here railing against ESG.
I just had this conversation with Courtney too, whenever we recorded the other day. So I've kind of separated this in my mind. To me, it looks like the old guard versus the new guard. So you have like the Bill Gates, the Klaus Schwabs, the Joe Bidens, that older generation of technocrat, progressive era technocratic idea versus the new guard, which would be like your Vivek Ramaswamy, your Peter Thiel, your Elon Musk, right? At the moment, I'm on the side of Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Vivek Ramaswamy, not because I believe in them long term, but because at the moment, the fight they are fighting is the same fight I am fighting, and they are the lesser of the two evils at the moment. The problem that people have is they want to view these situations as a zero-sum game, and they want to be like, well, I want out from under elites altogether. Well, it's never happened.
Right?
Every revolution has only led to a change of management, right? So you're always going to have to deal with some elite class. It's just which elites do you want to deal with? At this moment, sitting in January of 2023, I would say Elon is the lesser of two evils. Now, in February of 2023, that could very well change.
Right.
But at this moment where it stands today, that's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah, agreed.
No,
I hope this time we're not siding with the Soviets.
Right.
Well, we might be.
You may not.
How do
You
you
probably
know,
won't
right?
know until history is already written, and by that time, we're all
Yeah,
dead
It'll have
anyway.
been rewritten.
Yeah.
We've said this too. It's like I can, my visions can get quite dark. Even that whole coming cyber pandemic and this all might go away. Like this ability to have these conversations might just go away or become so costly that you really have to make some decisions. Or even just using the internet might become so costly to your principles as a human being that you're going to have to make some choices. That being said,
but number one, that's first before you go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That should be your number one reason for creating a community near you, whether it's with your church or with friends or whatever. Like you have to do something physically in person near you. You can't depend on us always being here having these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
No, it's interesting. And maybe that's why the big push with cancel culture was to do that, right? To sort of take the rug out of people and say, oh, you want to talk?
Yeah, well, they seem to be trying to destroy the churches before they destroy the internet.
No, in Canada, they're doing it physically. They're just burning them down.
They're doing them in the UK now too. Did you see that? There's I think 1,000-year-old church or something like that, or 500-year-old church is burned down in the UK. You're going to start seeing more and more of it. We are in a spiritual war, folks. There's a war on for your soul. I'll do a better. There's a war on for your soul. Like that's
You got to rip your shirt, Jay.
The Lord has come to me and said that your
true, though.
soul is in danger. You must repent. Repent, I tell you.
well, but it's true. There's just
and
there's
give me all
no
your
other way. There's just no other way of seeing it. That what's motivating these people, it can't be money.
Baptist preachers, man. I'm sorry.
Well, you grew up in it, man. We just grew up with like LARPing in it. But there's got to be something motivating these people beyond money, because it's not money. They have all the money. Like BlackRock, you're saying like they're in control of trillions of dollars across the world. That can't be a motivating factor anymore. I mean, maybe on some, maybe avarice is just that powerful. But I have to believe that there's something behind it that they've convinced themselves is a moralistic framework. When you start seeing oil and gas companies and mining companies talking about how environmentally sound they are, it's like, why would that matter to you? And it's like, oh, because you've committed sins. You have no redemption force. There is no confession for you. There is no, if you accept the modernist version, which is like you live, you die, and you go into nothingness. None of this matters. There's nothing. Then everything has to be attained here and now.
Did y'all
And
hear
that's
my,
a very Jewish way of looking at things. And I'm not putting on things on the Jews. I'm just simply saying, like, when you start
You're judged by your actions here. But I mean, that's the same thing, because if you look at what they did with COVID, I mean, you can only be so retardedly Keynesian, right? They must know that without productivity, there is no money. You're printing papers. So why did they do what they did?
for CBDCs?
Yeah. But again,
why that's like
puts him in more
staging
control.
9/11 to go to war in Iraq. They could just lock us down and say, here's a CBDC. good
Well,
luck.
no,
Yeah,
but there
well,
was
why
a,
CBDC? Like,
but well, that's what I was gonna say. There, oh, is the financial director of the World Bank. God, I can't think of who it is. I'll send y'all the link. I got it in my Substack. Anyway, he came out and he said the reason for CBDCs is for more control. We can control what you spend your money on, where you spend your money, when you spend your money, and how much of it you spend. Like, that's what it's all about. That's what CBDCs are for. I mean, they've admitted it. They've come out and said it. And the fact that they come out and say these things openly and it just shows how little they fear the presence of us online talking. Yeah, sure. The little engine that could, Brian Stelter, goes over to the World Economic Forum and he holds a panel on misinformation and he points at people like us. But I mean, they don't really care. They're looking at a way where they can make what we do illegal, not because we're a threat to them at this moment, but because we could potentially hold a threat to them, because we're keeping just enough people at bay that makes their job hard. They want their job to be easy. They want everybody to fall in line.
Yeah. Well, it's the strength in numbers. I mean, there's that old story about the Romans wanted to dress the slaves in a certain outfit so they could identify who was the slaves, and they decided not to because the slaves would realize how many of them there were. It's the same thing with us, all talking. You kind of want to shut down because we're realizing we're not alone. That's Jason's message going on a long time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And like one of the things I've always said, and it's one of the reason I try not to throw stones at other podcasters, even if I don't get along with them, is because
except
the more I'm over that. The more of us there are, the more there are like flinging arrows in the correct direction, then like who cares? I don't care. I don't pay so much attention. I really don't even listen to podcasts hardly anymore. At least of my peers. I listen to other stuff, but I really don't listen to my peers anymore. And I don't want a reason to argue. And so I don't listen because I don't want a reason to argue. It's not like whenever Buck was on your show, of course I listen to Buck, man. I love Buck. I talk to Buck probably 2-3 times a week. We chat, we text or whatever. But, yeah, I don't make a habit out of listening to podcasts, of my peers. I'm listening to other stuff. A lot of stuff I listen to is normie stuff, trying to figure out what the average person is intaking. So therefore I can put out a similar kind of message and shape it and kind of move them and persuade them in a little bit of a different direction. And so that's kind of my goal, is kind of reaching out to kind of the normie crowd and kind of pulling them in our direction.
That's the libertarian. That's a libertarian in you, man. You're just spreading the message.
TM.
I don't know what message I don't know what message I'm spreading. All I'm trying to do is just point out, I don't even know what my podcast is anymore.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. It's just me. It's just kind of it's almost like a documentary following me around on a journey. These are the things I'm interested in talking about today. So let's see what's happening. And that's where we go. I don't know. I don't know if that's libertarian.
I think that's a good place to start wrapping it up. I mean, I've said this on the show quite a number of times, but when I had my come to Jesus moment, what came through to me when I was asking for guidance and what do I do? And I came a very, very clear voice was saying, bear witness. And I responded, I can do that. I think that's exactly what, Tommy, you're doing, what we're doing, what Buck and all these other people are doing in their own ways is bearing witness to this time. And to Christ in many ways, and not exclusively. Just other people out there doing their own thing as well. But it is bearing witness of this time. And if nothing else, what we can pass down to hopefully our children or other future generations is this, and go, yes, you're not alone. Yes, this is happening. No, you're not crazy. Or we are, or maybe we are all crazy, but we're all crazy. Then we're all crazy and seeing the same stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So we're crazy, but we're dealing with reality, which is nice. I think that's if there's any comfort to be had, it's that. And
right.
Anyways, Tommy, anything else you want to talk about? Anything else on your head? Anything else in your heart that you want to get out there?
No, man. I've really enjoyed this. Always enjoy coming on and talking to y'all. I wish I could do it more. I am busy a lot.
The
So
invitation is always open, sir. Whenever we're doing anything, you just let us know what you want to do, and we will create a show for you, Tom.
yeah,
I was saying this to
I'm
Mark.
down with that. Don't flatter
Yeah,
me.
man. No, but I'm serious. I was saying this to Mark is that, you know, when I first kind of became aware of you, and we just started talking on Twitter, and when I got you on the Friend or Fed, like I instantly liked you, like, and it doesn't happen to me with a lot of people. Like I usually am like, let's see what this guy's all about. There was an instant like I'm cool with this guy. So hang on, my daughter's trying to invade this room.
Well, tell her to come on in.
It's not 2-Bit Podcast without the kid.
Yeah, bring her in. Tell her I said hello.
There we go.
Oh, look at the hair. It's everywhere.
You're on mute, Jay.
You're on mute, Bubba.
Yeah, she's got her. This is her morning face now.
You got bad head, baby.
Yeah.
She's
Tommy,
big.
tell the nice people where they can find you, what you're up to. You got Substack, you got podcast. Let the nice people know.
Yeah, man. You can TommySalmons.com is my Substack. Easy enough if you can spell Salmons, which is SALMONS, like the fish, except one more. And then libertarianinstitute.org/year-0/ is where you can find the podcast at the Libertarian Institute. If you're looking for video, I've started publishing video here recently, so you can find me at Rumble or YouTube at year 0. And if you can't find my Rumble or my YouTube, go to the libertarianinstitute.org, check the show notes. I'll have the links all in there.
Beautiful.
Thanks so much. Thanks again, Tommy. I always appreciate it, man. Always love talking to you. And we will talk to you fine folks sometime soon. Like, subscribe, do the things. We are now on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're on Google Podcasts. We are on your favorite podcatchers. Obviously YouTube, Rumble. Where else are we at? There's a few other places, I'm sure.
Don't put me on the spot, man.
We keep popping up.
Nice.
Just look for us. Look for the
places.
search for Mark's pretty face.
Google it.
Yeah, I got the voice. He's got the face,
Great.
folks.
Something.
Thanks again, folks. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you
Cheers.
soon.
Peace. Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks.
If you're gonna play this game of pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times, it's the same old worn-out stories, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. Never really making any kind of change, but they keep on getting re-elected, and I find that strange. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants out of taking our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants out of taking our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the things that they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names, on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. Just 4 more years of war and taxes, 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedom. Fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken